Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 13 game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. And I'm already looking way more forward to this slate than I was yesterday. As yesterday, I was not a big fan of that slate whatsoever heading into it. You guys knew that. I told you guys straight out. But this one, I am looking forward to it. I think there's a lot of good options on this slate. We got some decent pitching options and ready to go. I'm looking forward to it. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players and cover the sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. You also follow me over on Twitter. I'm at Pennell16. I'm at CPenn16 on IG. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, it's always much appreciated. I cover MLB, NBA, and NASCAR on Patreon, and also the NFL when that comes up. But NASCAR, we have a doubleheader this weekend, so if you want to check it out, feel free to do so. We have a very busy schedule this weekend with NBA, MLB, and we have a doubleheader for NASCAR. So looking forward to it, though. It's going to be very fun. You guys know I love NASCAR. We're doing 2 live streams this weekend, and it's going to be a very fun time, double the content. But so if you're interested, links in the description below. If you're not, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So at pitcher, I think the clear-cut option we have is Trevor Bauer. He comes in at 10,600. Gets a matchup versus Milwaukee. Now, you obviously got guys like Yelich that can do damage, but for the most part, I think he's going to be fine. He has been an absolute rock star in his first 2 starts this season. Now, granted, he did go up against Detroit, which is one of the best matchups you can ask for as a right-handed pitcher that has strikeout upside because they are just absolutely dreadful versus righties, but Trevor Bauer has been absolutely excellent this season. There is no denying that. I mean, I could just read you guys his first 2 starts. He scored 36.5 points, and then he went all the way down to 36.4 points in his next start. And he's throwing 105 and 111 pitches, and that's one of the things I love about Trevor Bauer is we do not have to worry about a pitch count whatsoever. I mean, we saw the guy get 120-plus pitches, a lot of outings, or I don't know if it was a lot of outings, but I've seen plenty of times he just goes really, really deep into the game, especially when he's on Cleveland, because obviously I'm a big Indians fan, so I was watching his starts every single time. And look, the guy's just got the longest leash in the world, and that gives you a nice floor, and that's something I want in DFS. Now, I know the pitchers are starting to get a little bit more stretched out, but still, he's one of the guys you can pretty much lock in for 100-plus pitches unless he's getting shelled, which I don't think that would be the case here. And so I definitely like Trevor Bauer. He's looking like my SP1 on the slate. He is a little expensive, but I think it's not going to be too much of an issue to fit him in. Vegas likes him as well. Only 3.42 runs against him, which I believe might be the lowest on the slate. I'd have to double check that, but it's at least bottom 3. 54% chance for the win, 7.5 strikeouts in Vegas. The guy's got good strikeout stuff, 28% K rate last season. Walks can get a little bit up there, 9% walk rate, but 4.33 xFIP, and I'd like the upside here. Now, the matchup versus Milwaukee, look, they have lost some key bats, like Lorenzo Cain opting out. Then you also have Ryan Braun on the IL. And Yelich, I know he had an inside the park home run today, but for the most part, he's been pretty bad. So this isn't a lineup I'm going to be too scared of whatsoever. I do think there is a good amount of strikeouts. If you're looking at their numbers last season versus right-handed pitching, they did strike out 24.9% of the time. Obviously, they have some power, but for the most part, I think Trevor Bauer is going to be fine. He's the SP1 on the slate. I feel really comfortable with him, and I just don't think there's a lot of risk there. I mean, maybe besides Christian Yelich, but outside of that, I think Bauer should be able to have a pretty good outing. Then we have Aaron Savali, 9,300, keeping it up with an Indians pitcher. I know Bauer's not in the Indians, but he's a former Indians pitcher. But you guys know I'm a sucker for Indians pitching. But Savali, he's had 2 pretty good starts, and he already had a very nice start versus the White Sox in his debut outing this season, where he scored 26 points in, I believe, 6 innings, and he struck out 9, and he's been over 100 pitches in each outing, and he's actually struck out 9 in each outing, and he's faced the White Sox, which they can strike out a lot, but they also have a lot of power, so it's kind of a risk-rewarded matchup there. Then versus the Twins, he struck out 9 Twins, and we know the Twins have one of the best lineups in the in all of baseball, so he's looked pretty good. The strikeouts have been there. I mean, if you're looking at his numbers last season, he wasn't a big strikeout guy at only 20%, but the Indians' pitching's been great. He limited the hard contact last year, 38% hard contact rate, but only .62 home runs per 9 innings, so he kept the ball in the park. And look, this is a pretty good matchup versus the White Sox. We just saw Lindblom last night. I think he struck out 7, and I'm definitely going to trust Savali over Lindblom. Now, he's not 5,300 like Lindblom was, but I think Savali's a decent pivot off of Bauer. I'm not sure if I would want to spend up for Bauer and Savali because there's some bats I want to afford in this slate, but there's actually some cheaper options too. So you might be able to fit them both, and there's definitely potential to get 20 strikeouts between the two. Now, look, the White Sox definitely have some power, and they have some new bats in the lineup, but Last season, they struck out 26.3% of the time versus righties, which I believe was top 3 in the entire league. If you're looking at their current roster, it's still over 25%. So there's plenty of strikeouts in this lineup. He had success versus them in his first outing of the season. He's another guy we don't have to worry about a pitch count issue, kind of like Trevor Bauer. So I know he's a little bit expensive, but I still think Savali's fine. Probably more so in tournaments because of the price tag, but I still think he's playable in all formats. But definitely, if you had to pick between a spend-up option of like Savali or Bauer, I'll go with Bauer just because I feel much safer with him. He's got the higher K rate. If you're looking at last year's number, I know Savali's had a great K rate so far this season. He's got 18 strikeouts in 2 outings and a 3.75 ERA, but I think both are fine options. And if you want to save a little bit of salary, you have Matthew Boyd. He comes in at 8,900. Now, he's not had a great start to the season, but there is upside here versus Pittsburgh. But on the downside, he has really struggled this season. He's given up 8 total runs in 2 outings, and he's given up 15 hits, and he's went no longer than 9 innings, and he struck out 6 in his last start and only struck out 2 versus Cincinnati in his first start. It's been a rocky start, but Matthew Boyd's certainly a guy that has upside. And if you're looking at his numbers last season, he was pretty good. He had a 30% K rate, only a 6% walk rate. He can give up some power to righties, but Pittsburgh was a team that really struggled with lefties last season. If you're looking at their splits, pretty weak numbers. A 22.7% K rate, didn't strike out a lot, but very weak power numbers. Only a 141 ISO, a 287 WOBA, and a 75 WRC+. Plus. These were some of the worst numbers in the league in the power department. So I think Matthew Boyd's going to be fine here. I know he struggled to start the season, but we're going to see anywhere from 90 to 100 pitches here, and he had solid numbers last season. He's got strikeout upside, and only 4.1 runs against him. He is a favorite in Vegas, 6 strikeouts. I think he's a fine option. If you want to save even more salary for your SP2, we have Michael Wacha at 7,900. Now, he's going up against the Marlins, which is theoretically a very good matchup, but I will say the Marlins are 6-1 this season. They have been winning games, and they actually scored some runs last night, so theoretically it should be a walk in the park. No pun intended, Waka, but oh man, the Marlins have looked good, but I'm still going to trust that they're a pretty weak lineup overall. Now, Wacha is not the greatest pitcher in the world. He only had a 19% K rate last season and a 10% walk rate. Very high ground ball pitcher, though. But the matchup versus the Marlins is what's going to get me there. I mean, if you're looking at their numbers last season, they had a 25% K rate, 124 ISO, 75 WRC+. Plus. And if you're just looking at the names on the roster, it's absolutely horrendous. I mean, yeah, you got guys like Corey Dickerson and a couple of other guys like Jonathan VR, but overall, it's just a really, really rough-looking lineup, and I think he's a viable option. I'm not expecting a ton of upside here, but I do think he is safe at 7,900. But I think guys like Matthew Boyd, I know he's $1,000 more expensive, but I think the upside's much higher for Boyd because of the strikeout potential. Then if you want to punt all the way down, we have Kikuchi at 5,000, and I actually think this is a pretty viable way to go if you just want to spend up on some bats and use him as your SP2 with Trevor Bauer, because Kikuchi has not been awful, but he was pretty bad in his first start. But if you're looking at his second start versus the Athletics, he scored 29.1 fantasy points and went 6 innings, struck out 9 on 90 pitches. I mean, 9 strikeouts from Kikuchi, but the guy with an 18% K rate, or 16% K rate, even worse. Not something we should expect most outings, but that was from last year. And this year, his fastball has been a tick up in velocity. Like last year, his fastball was not very fast, but it's been up a couple of miles per hour this season. And, if you're going to throw faster, typically it's going to lead to more strikeouts most of the time. And that was the case last outing versus the Athletics. And this is a pretty good matchup versus the Rockies. I know recently we've been playing the Rockies pretty much every single slate. Keep in mind, though, that was in Coors Field. They're a much different team away from Coors Field. Like in Coors Field, yeah, they're going to be the top offense on the slate. Now that they're away from Coors, you can target pitchers against them. It's not like, Arenado and Trevor Story and Blackman turned to dust outside of Coors, but it's certainly a big downgrade in the park for them going up in Seattle. And now, if you're looking at the Rockies splits last season versus left-handed pitching, they had a 25.2% K rate. Did have some power. You got guys like Arenado and Story that all hit lefties very well. Even Charlie Blackman and David Dahl hit lefties too, and you also have Matt Kemp. So it's not like it's going to be a walk in the park for Kikuchi, but definitely like targeting the Rockies away from Coors Field. And just overall, I think there's some strikeout potential here. And the thing is, he's 5K, guys. We don't need much here. He's only 5K. And look, if he gets you 8 to 10 points, you're probably going to be pretty happy. And we've been nailing the cheap pitchers the past 2 days. We got Josh Lindblom last night. He had 7 strikeouts. And then we had TJ Antone, who got 12 points. So Maybe we can keep it 3 for 3. I think Kikuchi's fine here. I think in most projection systems, including mine, he's going to grade out as the best value pitcher in the slate. And look, the uptick in velocity is obviously a boost, and this is a high strikeout potential matchup here. I mean, they got a lot of good lefties in the lineup, like Daniel Murphy, Charlie Blackmon, David Dahl, that, going to lefty on lefty matchup, which is obviously a downgrade for the most part. Actually, I know Blackmon and David Dahl have actually more power numbers versus lefties, but you're taking them away from Coors Field, and their numbers are going to drop pretty dramatically for the most part. I mean, there's some guys that are still pretty close, but definitely prefer them in Coors Field if you're using the bats. So I like pitchers against them away from Coors, and I think Kikuchi at 5K, not too bad. 4.56 runs against him, which isn't great, but again, he's only 5K, slight underdog, a 49% chance for the win, and 4.5 strikeouts in Vegas. Just give me 8 to 10 points, and I'm not complaining. You're going to allow me to spend up for some other bats that I have some interest in, guys like Mike Trout and so on. But I think that's all I want to talk about for pitching. A couple of other guys might pop up in my radar as the day goes on tomorrow. But as of right now, just early look, these are some guys that look pretty interesting. So now we'll move on to the bats, and we'll start with catcher. We have Mitch Garver. He comes in at 4,500 going up against Jacob Junis, and I think the Twins are going to be one of the better stacks in the entire slate. Implied team totals at 5 right now. I can see that creeping up as the day goes on, but Junis is not someone that really scares me too much. Mitch Garver is a guy I prefer versus lefties compared to righties, but he still had good numbers versus righties last season. I mean, the splits fall off a little bit, but still a 327 ISO versus righties is nothing to scoff at. I know if you're looking at splits versus lefties, they're almost JD Martinez-like, but still, it's not too bad. Jacob Junis, he actually gave up more power to righties last season with a 210 ISO and a 20% K rate. I think both sides of the plate are in play here, and Mitch Garver, if you're spending up a catcher and you want a piece of the Twins, I don't hate it. So don't mind Mitch Garver. And speaking of Twins, we have a former Twin in Jason Castro at 4,100, and I like the Angels. They're one of the top stacks on the entire slate, and you definitely want lefties versus Jordan Lyles. I'm still playing some righties versus him, like Mike Trout and Justin Upton, but definitely like lefties versus Jordan Lyles. If you're looking at his splits last season, he had a 277 ISO given up to lefties, 277, 22% K rate to lefties as well, and a double-digit walk rate. If you're looking at splits versus righties, he definitely has some solid numbers, 277, a little bit 164 ISO, 25.6% K rate, gets that walk rate down in half. So definitely prefer lefties versus him. I still think we can target guys like Mike Trout because he's freaking Mike Trout. He can hit anybody at any time, anywhere, in any park. But I like Jason Castro here. He's got some good splits versus righties, 244 ISO, 123 WRC plus, just some solid numbers all around. Now, he's a little expensive. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but if you're stacking Angels, I don't hate it. Then we have Wilson Ramos, 3,200. Not sure who the pitcher's going to be for Miami. Draftkings has it as a lefty, and was it Costanza, something like, what's his name? Oh, my bad. Castano, something like that. He's a lefty. If he's in, I like Wilson Ramos at 3,200. I'm not sure who's going to be the pitcher yet, but either way, it's not really going to be a pitcher that scares me too much. And if it is the lefty, Wilson Ramos, he hits lefties very well, and he's very cheap at 3,200. If you're looking at his splits last season versus lefties, he's got a 346 batting average, 151 WRC plus, near 200 ISO. Very good numbers all around, only a 12% K rate. So he would be one of the top options they catch on the entire slate if it is indeed a lefty on the mound. But as of right now, that is pending, and I have no idea. Then dropping down to first base, we have Freddie Freeman. He comes in at 5,200, gets that matchup against Vince Velasquez, which Vince Velasquez is a guy that's got upside, but he's also got a ton of downside. He's got a good strikeout rate, around 25%, but he gives up a lot of power, and we saw that earlier this season where I think he was going up against the Marlins, and he ended up giving up quite a few runs, I believe. He started off fine, but ended up giving up some runs, and the Braves definitely have some more power than the Marlins, and they actually got quite a few good bats, including Freddie Freeman, hitting from the right side of the plate, I guess, as a lefty. But if you're looking at splits versus righties last season, 280 ISO, 310 batting average, 154 WRC plus, 416 on base percentage. If you're looking at Velasquez's numbers, he's got a good strikeout rate to both sides of the plate, 25% and 24%, but he gives up power to both sides of the plate as well, 226 ISO to lefties and 243 ISO to righties. So I think the Braves make a decent stack on this slate just because Velasquez can be a wild card. Now, he can be on sometimes and rank up the strikeouts, so it's a little bit of a risk reward for the Braves and also a little expensive, but I think Freeman is fine as a one-off if you just have 5,200 remaining in your first baseman slot for some reason. Then Shoyotani, 4,700, one of my more favorite plays on the slate. Love the Angels tonight. I especially love the lefties. And Otani, he went deep last night, had a big fly, and Look, he's 4,700. I think he could be above 5K. Going to be hitting cleanup here, and I like the lefties versus Lauer. I already touched on it, but much worse splits versus lefties, and Ohtani's got some good splits versus righties. I think this is one of the better home run spots on the entire slate. Then we have Paul Goldschmidt at 4,500 going up against the lefty. Paul Goldschmidt loves him some lefties. And John Lester, while he's not the worst pitcher in the world, he's a low strikeout pitcher at this point in his career, and he gives up some power to righties. And Goldschmidt's got some great splits versus lefties. A near 300 ISO versus them, 148 WRC plus. Just good numbers all around. A near 20% walk rate. So I think Goldschmidt is just fine at 4,500. Then Carlos Santana, 4,300. So I've been really just kind of leaving the Indians off of my radar till further notice because they've just been dreadful. They have like the worst batting average in the league before last night anyway. But they went off for 13 runs last night. So they finally got going. It was nice to see. They have a good offense on paper. Santana, Cesar Hernandez, Jose Ramirez, Francisco Lindor, Franmil Reyes, and some other guys in the back end aren't even that bad, like Bradley Zimmer. Luplow if he's facing a lefty, and some other guys, and they just have not been producing, but they finally got going, just had a complete hit parade last night, so I think these guys could be on our radar going up against Dylan Cease. Now, Dylan Cease is a guy I think has upside in his career. He's got a high strikeout rate. I believe it was around 25% last season, but we do like lefties versus Cease, and he did struggle in his first outing versus the Indians. He did not do that well, gave up some runs. And I think these guys are definitely playable going up against Dylan Cease, who does struggle with lefties. And we have plenty of switch hitters in this lineup. I believe the first 4 guys are switch hitters: Santana, Lindor, Ramirez, and Cesar Hernandez. So I think, Cesar is a switch hitter. Yeah, we just get that mixed up. Let me just double check. Yes, he is. Okay, so the first 4 guys are switch hitters, and they're low strikeout guys for the most part. And Santana, he's fine if you're looking at splits last season, 237 ISO versus righties. All these guys are in play if you're stacking the Indians. If you're looking at Cease's splits, he's pretty tough on righties. 28% K rate, 174 ISO given up. But if you're looking at lefties, 257 ISO, and the strikeout rate dips down to 21%. I didn't mean to say drips, I meant dips. So I like the lefties here versus Cease, and the Indians got quite a few they can throw at him. Then going down to first base / second base, we have Max Muncy at 5,300, and the Dodgers make one of the better stacks on this slate. They have one of the higher team totals at 5.53, might be the highest currently, I think. But Jeff Samardzija, he's the guy that struggles with lefties, and the Dodgers has just absolutely crushed right-handed pitching. And Max Muncy, he's actually great versus both sides of the plate. Actually pretty similar numbers, and he actually has some better numbers overall versus lefties, but he's obviously playable versus righties. He's got tons of power, 267 ISO versus them, and just overall the Dodgers are a pretty good stack on this slate. Jeff Samardzija was pretty tough on righties last season, but versus lefties, 221 ISO given up, and a lot of fly balls as well. So definitely prefer the lefties here, and we have quite a few good ones that the Dodgers can throw at him. Then Cesar Hernandez, if you're stacking up the Indians lefties, you can also use Franmil Reyes if you just want to go through it for a full 1 through 5, but Hernandez is a better pitcher versus right-handed pitching. If you're looking at his splits, pretty bad versus lefties. They're not great versus righties either, but the numbers all bump up a little bit. 286 batting average, only a 16% K rate. So Cesar's fine if you're stacking the tribe up. Luis Arias, either way, he's a fine play. I do like the Twins, righties, and lefties here for the most part. I mean, we have a lot of good lefties in the lineup, but for the righties, it's pretty much just Mitch Garver and Nelson Cruz. But Arias is fine at 3,500. Jacob Junis did give up more power to righties last season, but the Twins do make a pretty good stack on this slate, in my opinion, and they're also pretty cheap, too. I mean, you got Reyes, Kepler, Rosario, they're all pretty cheap. So Arias is fine if you're just looking for value at second base, because outside of Max Muncy, I mean, you kind of can just go mid-range or value at that point. And Tommy La Stella, 3,500. He's just a lefty versus Jordan Lyles. He's got plenty of power versus right-handed pitching. If you're looking at his splits last season, he had a 306 batting average versus them, only an 8% K rate. I also should have mentioned Arias only has a 7% K rate versus righties too, so he's another high contact hitter. But Stella's got some pop, 215 ISO, 134 WRC plus, over a 500 slugging. Stella, if you're stacking up the Angels, he's a nice affordable option that's also eligible at first base as well. Going down to third base, we have Jose Ramirez, who hit a triple and 2 home runs last night, I believe. I think he scored 44 fantasy points. I believe that's what it was. Went absolutely off. That's the kind of thing that J-Ram can do. He's a very streaky guy, and when he gets hot, he can get hot. And look, I might carry over tomorrow, and I like the Indians lefties here. He's really expensive at 5,300, but the lefties are in a good spot here, so you can certainly look J-Ram's way. He's got more power versus right-handed pitching. Eugenio Suarez, 4,200, gets a matchup versus Eric Lauer, the lefty. Now, Lauer was pretty tough on righties last season. If you're looking at his splits, versus righties, 23% K rate, 148 ISO given up, and a 300 WOBA. He actually was worse versus lefties in each department, but Suarez is so good versus lefties, I still think he's viable. 301 ISO versus them last season, 577 slugging, 149 WRC plus, and a 417 on base percentage. He's just got really good splits versus lefties, and he's cheap enough, so I think he is viable on this slate. Now, I'm not sure if Josh Johnson's playing or not. It sounds like he might not, so if he's not in, I think Marvin Gonzalez is going to be fine. If he is in at 3,700, I believe that's what he is, he's obviously an excellent addition to that twin stack that you guys can be playing because he's going to be hitting second, and he's also very cheap, and he's got plenty of power versus righties and lefties, and Junis could have more power to righties last season. So Donaldson would be an elite play, but I don't think he's going to end up being in the lineup, so Marvin Gonzalez at 3K, he's just a cheap option on the Twins. I mean, the numbers aren't going to be great for him. He's actually better versus lefties, but just cheap Twins exposure. And then Phillip Evans, if you want to go all the way down. Also Matt Davidson, if you want to go all the way down too. But just guys that get favorable lefty on righty matchup, or I should have phrased that better, righty on lefty matchups. It's lefty on righty matchup for the pitchers. But both guys, they're okay hitters versus lefties, and they're fine if you want to go all the way down. But nothing I'm going to go too in depth there. Then going down to shortstop, we have Francisco Lindor, 5,100. And again, I prefer the lefties versus Cease here. And I think they're all in play if you want to stack them up. Now, they are a little expensive for the most part. J-Ram's 5,300, Lindor's 5,100. You can get a cheaper option in Cesar Hernandez and Carlos Santana, but they are a little bit pricey. But Lindor and J-Ram are the two guys you'd be spending up for, and the rest you can just build around with some value. But Frankie's fine. He's got better splits versus right-handed pitching. And like I said, we can use the lefties versus Cease here as a stack. So don't mind Frankie. Corey Seager, 4,500. He's part of that Los Angeles Dodgers stack that I think is certainly viable. All lefties versus Samardzija are in play here. And Seager's been great to start the season. He's got over a 300 batting average and just pretty good numbers overall. And I like this price tag we're getting on him, hitting right in the heart of the order for the Dodgers. And he's got some good splits versus righties. And like I said, I prefer the lefties versus Jeff Samardzija. So Corey Seager is in a pretty good spot. Hori Polanco, 3,900, definitely a guy I'm going to have some interest in. I mean, I like the price tag, and every time he faces a righty, you got to have some interest because he's got some pretty good splits versus righties. I mean, he's got a 306 batting average. He's a low strikeout kind of guy. I like guys that get high contact with a little bit of power as well with a 207 ISO. And like I said, Junis has given more power to righties last season, but both sides of the plate are in play here, and Twins are one of the better stacks on the slate, especially for their price tag. So definitely like Hori Polanco. Then Didi Gregorius, 3,700. He's actually better versus left-handed pitching, but if you're looking at Kyle Wright's splits, he was really rough versus lefties, and I mean that in a good way for Didi. He only had 15% K rate, 250 ISO. He gave up a lot of power to righties as well, but strikeout rate dipped, and I think he is certainly playable. So I don't mind Didi if you're going for value, but I prefer going to Polanco at 3,900. Going down to the outfield, we have Mike Trout, 5,900. Super expensive, but look, he's been crushing ever since he had that kid, the new baby narrative. I could see that happening again versus Jordan Lyles. Now, Lyles was very tough on righties last season, like very tough, but we're also talking about Mike Trout, who's the best hitter in baseball versus right-handed pitching for the most part. 379 ISO, 188 WRC plus, 682 slugging, over 300 batting average. It's Mike Trout, guys. You guys get the idea. If you have the money for him, play him. I like the Angel stack on this slate. They have a team total of around 5.3. It's gonna be one of the higher on this it's gonna be on the higher end of the slate. So I definitely like the Angels and Mike Trout. You can't leave him off an Angel stack. Bryce Harper, 5,600. Again, I already mentioned it with Didi, but lefties kind of crushed Kyle Wright last season, much lower strikeout rate. And Bryce Harper, he's actually got better numbers versus lefties if you're looking at his splits. Better numbers versus lefties, but he's still fine versus righties. But he's one of those reverse splits guys. But I still like Bryce Harper, 5,600. If you're using some Phillies lefties, which there's not many of them, but there's a few you could tag on. But Hoskins and JT Realmuto are all in play here because if you're looking at the Kyle Wright splits, he give up power to both sides of the plate. I just didn't have them listed on here because I don't want to list everybody on the slate. Then Nelson Cruz, 4,900. Junis did give up more power to righties last season. I think the Twins make a pretty good play on this, make a pretty good stack on this slate. And I think a lot of people are just going to play the lefties here. So Nelson Cruz might go lower than he should, and he's got tremendous power versus both sides. I mean, 461 ISO to lefties, but still a 283 ISO to righties, and good numbers all around. Still over a 300 batting average versus righties. Nelson Cruz is a fine play in all formats if you're stacking up the Twins. Prefer using the cheaper lefties here, but Cruz is fine in tournaments. Then Cody Bellinger, 4,800. I think we're getting a fantastic price on Bellinger. I could see him having high ownership because the Dodgers have one of the higher team totals on the slate. Actually, might end up being the highest team total on the slate. I think it is right now. And the lefties crushed Jeff Samardzija, and we're getting him at 4,800. Now he hasn't been great to start the season, but 4,800. I mean, come on. If you're looking at splits versus righties last year, 328 ISO, 167 WRC plus, 645 slugging, 317 batting average, and only a 16% K rate. Yeah, you got to like him at this price tag. I definitely like that. And I already showed you guys Samardzija splits versus lefties, but they're much worse than they are versus righties. So definitely like that price on Belly. Nick Castellanos, similar reasons to what I talked about with Eugenio Suarez. Lauer is pretty tough on the righties, but Castellanos has elite numbers versus lefties. We're talking a 343 ISO, 370 batting average, guys, only a 13% K rate, 190 WRC plus. He's got, JD-like numbers versus lefties. So Castellanos 4,500 is certainly in play here. Michael Brantley 4,500 going up against Chris Bassett. Don't love this spot for the Astros, but I told you guys it's a rule of law that if Brantley is in the mid-range and he's facing a righty, that's not like Max Scherzer, Shane Bieber, those kind of guys. He's going to make the sheet, and he did. Because, look, he's a low strikeout pitcher. He's a low strikeout hitter. And he's got great numbers versus righties. 226 ISO, 323 batting average, only an 8% K rate, 380 on base percentage. Just good numbers all around. Now, if you're looking at Bassett splits, he had a 25% K rate to lefties, which was actually more than it was versus righties. But he did give it more power to lefties with a 201 ISO. So Brantley's fine here if you're looking for a mid-range bat. But two of my more favorite plays on the slate, as always, Max Kepler, 4,300, going up against Jacob Junis. Oh, but when I had him as my thumbnail video for a slate on Tuesday, I think it was, or Wednesday, he had 0 points until the 9th inning with 2 outs left, and then he had a 3-run homer, which saved the day. So thank you, Max Kepler, for saving me from getting a 0 from my core play of the day. Thank you. But he's in a great spot here. I mean, Jacob Junis is not a guy I'm going to be too afraid of, and Kepler was great versus both sides of the plate last season. 281 ISO versus righties. Only 236 batting average. He had a near 300 batting average versus lefties, but great versus both sides of the plate. And definitely like this price on Kepler, and I like the twin stack. So love him. Eddie Rosario is a similar play. He did nothing on Wednesday. Hit a homer today, I believe. Hit a homer today, so he was a day late and dollar short on that one. But 4,100. I mean, Kepler and Rosario just grayed out very well for me on this slate. And the Royals bullpen's not that great either. Then Justin Upton, if you're stacking up I almost said the Twins for some reason. If you're stacking up the Angels, 3,900. He's great versus righties. Lyles is tough on righties, but if you're looking at Upton splits, he had better numbers versus righties compared to lefties last season. So he's viable at 3,900. And if you want a pump play, he's also eligible at third base as well. You have Matt Beatty, 2,600. Going to be hitting the bottom of the order, but just a cheap lefty versus Jeff Samardzija. And he's got much better splits versus righties than he does lefties. So I think we went through the entire thing. I think I ran down through that pretty quick, around 30 minutes. I think that's pretty good for a 13-game slate. But if this video was helpful, guys, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. Really appreciate it. Follow me on social media. Support me on Patreon if you want. You get the cheat sheets, the Discord chats, the Discord chat, the projections, my cheat sheet with notes on every single player that I have interest in. So a lot of time and effort put into that, and I update this throughout the day. So if you guys are interested, hit the link in the description below. We have NASCAR coming up. My NASCAR video is going to be posted soon after I post this one, probably around the afternoon tomorrow. Then we have a doubleheader, so I got 2 live streams, 2 breakdown videos, 2 articles, 2 spreadsheets, 2 sets of projections. Gonna be busy, gonna be fun though. Looking forward to it. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys enjoy the start to your weekend.